What's up, gamers? I'm your host Cobra, and this is the Freeroll. Today, we're taking a look at what Pokemon would look like if it were developed as a Web3 game. Now, before we jump into our Web3 Pokemon thought exercise, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button below. You aren't going to want to miss any of the future content coming on the Freeroll. Pokemon is the #1 franchise in all of video games. It's probably close to the #1 franchise in any sector of all time, if we're being honest with ourselves. It is crazy popular. Kids love Pokemon, and they don't stop loving it when they grow up generally. In addition, Web3 is technology, and technology tends to be a little bit more difficult to understand, especially when it comes to things like video games, because you can't see or observe the technology in action. You just have to understand what's happening underneath the hood. So today I am going to walk you through a whole bunch of examples of what Pokemon would look like if it were developed as a Web3 game instead of what we have today. Let's lead things off with what I think is the most obvious use case for Web3 technology inside of Pokemon, and that is the Pokemon that you are catching and battling and playing with in-game would become NFTs that live on the blockchain. Now, if you've ever played a Pokemon game, then you know that 99% plus of all of the Pokemon you are catching have no real value at all, because everybody that has played those games has caught a whole bunch of those Pokemon many times over and would have no reason to get one from you. So why would anybody want to mint their Pokemon as an NFT and put it on the blockchain? There's a couple of reasons and a whole bunch of different types of Pokemon that actually do have quite a bit of value, and I believe if they lived on the blockchain instead, they would have a lot more value as well. So let's take a look at those cases. Now, the first reason why somebody might want to buy or trade for one of these Pokemon is simply if they don't have the time to acquire what they want or need themselves. Yes, there are many Pokemon that are easy to find in-game, but when I say easy, that doesn't mean that it can be done quickly, and we all are really busy these days. Not everybody wants to spend an extra hour hunting down a particular Pokemon to add to their team. And furthermore, there's a whole bunch of people who just don't have an extra hour to do that, even if they were willing to. So they might be willing to pay $5 to get that Pokemon from you off of the marketplace, or trade one of their other desirable Pokemon in exchange for it as well. Next, we have a competitive Pokemon. Now, if you have played online Pokemon battles or taken part in Pokemon League or a Pokemon tournament, then you know there is very little out there that is more competitive than Pokemon battles. Pokemon has been around for a long time. There are thousands, if not millions, of people who take those battles very seriously. And for that reason, if you are going to have a chance at being competitive at all, then all 6 of the Pokemon on your team have to be perfect. And when I say perfect, that does not just mean a couple of things need to be right. It means that every single stat, nature, ability, IV, and other mechanics that are available to Pokemon needs to be exactly right for your exact team build. This is a lot of work. In fact, it's essentially impossible to go out and just catch perfect Pokemon. There are so many factors, so many pieces of RNG that are involved in determining the specific strengths and weaknesses of every single Pokemon that it is a lot of work. And you really need to understand the game in order to know what a perfect Pokemon even looks like, because it's not just a simple matter of maxing out every single stat. There are limitations in choices that you are going to have to make, but getting your hands on one is a lot of work. So for that reason, lots of people, even today, in an ecosystem where there is no official mechanism for buying and selling Pokemon will buy and sell competitively built Pokemon, because most players don't want to put in the time and effort to make a Pokemon that is perfect, but everybody wants to have those Pokemon on their team for competitive battling purposes. Let's quickly dive into the 1% of Pokemon that actually have real collectability and significant value in the world today even. That would be the big targets for collectors and players in a Web3 version of the game. First, we have shiny Pokemon. And if you've played Pokemon, you know that all of the Pokemon of a single type look exactly the same. However, there is actually about a 1 in 4,000 chance that a Pokemon will have a color variation, and that is considered a shiny Pokemon. Some of them are subtle differences, others are dramatic changes to the color scheme, but all of them, when they enter a battle, have a very cool sparkle at the beginning that makes it really obvious to everybody that you're using a shiny Pokemon. Those are very, very highly desired, in part because they are very rare and very difficult to get your hands on. Then we have legendary and mythical Pokemon. These are Pokemon that are really strong, and there's generally only one instance inside of the game story where you're able to catch that Pokemon. That means that it takes many, many hours of gameplay in order to get just one copy. And for that reason, they are always going to be more scarce than the other Pokemon in games that can be caught multiple times. The mythical Pokemon are not even part of the game's story. They are ones that are added in separately later in all sorts of different ways, and oftentimes are even more difficult to get your hands on. But again, they stay very limited and therefore are much harder to get your hands on as a collector and have actual value. They're also just more fun and popular for players to use in-game because they tend to be the strongest Pokemon as well. Then there are event Pokemon, and these are special editions. They could be shiny, they could be legendary or mythical, or they could just be regular Pokemon themselves, but some other version or thing about them is specific and limited. The thing that denotes an event Pokemon is that it comes in something called a Cherish Ball. It's a special red ball that only an event Pokemon comes in. There's no way to acquire that ball and capture a Pokemon yourself in it. And the ball's pretty cool, so people like that. But those are specific special editions that are limited and difficult to get your hands on. Then finally, there are rare Pokeballs in the game as well, and there are people that collect Pokemon that are caught in specific rare balls. There are other collectors out there who want their Pokemon in matching balls, and some of those are rare, some of them are not rare. Some of those players and collectors want them in the rare matching color, and so there's just a whole bunch of different things out there that are difficult to acquire yourself that people absolutely are willing to buy or trade for. Breeding has been one of the most popular features in Pokemon for a long, long time. It's also one of the most popular features for a Web3 game that's being developed today. However, the difference is Pokemon was simply trying to give you additional functionality in their game, and the Web3 projects are attempting to provide you utility and value within their game. However, the Web3 games have failed to do that, at least for any sort of extended period of time, whereas Pokemon, which wasn't even trying to do that, has successfully achieved it for a long, long time. There is a big market out there for Pokemon breeding services so that you can get the specific Pokemon you want without having to put in all of the time and effort that it takes to create it. However, you can't make a whole lot of money doing this today because it's technically not allowed in the game. If this were a Web3 game, though, it would be a built-in feature to be able to build and then buy and sell the things that you have created in-game, and that would add a lot more value to those Pokemon. Now, if you've listened to me talk about Web3 gaming at all anywhere, there's a good chance you've heard this example before, but I will say it again. Pokemon is the best example that traditional gaming has for what a Web3 game can look like. The reason for this is that Pokemon has actually achieved a level of interoperability that most Web3 projects could only dream of. And they do this via a product called Pokemon Home. If you are a collector of Pokemon, then you are likely already paying for this service. Yes, you are paying for it. It is an additional charge in order to get access to these features, but the service allows you to take the Pokemon and Pokemon-related items from various different Pokemon titles and games, move them to a central location so that your collection can all live in one place. And then, if you want to, you can move those Pokemon into other various Pokemon titles and play with the same Pokemon you used in one game inside of another game. That is interoperability, and it is very, very cool. Pokemon Home does a few other things, but that's primarily what it is for. Your collection hub, moving Pokemon from one game to another, and for making trades with your friends. You can trade inside of the games as well, so that is, this service is not a requirement to be able to trade. However, it gives you another avenue for trading, and it's a little bit easier. However, if Pokemon were designed as a Web3 game today, then Pokemon Home would simply be their Pokemon marketplace. Now, the first thing is that nobody pays for access to a marketplace, and nobody would pay for access to this marketplace either. It would be free instead of a paid service. The reason for that is they would simply collect a fee on each of the transactions that's happening within the marketplace, like a traditional marketplace does today. And this would also allow for actual buying and selling of Pokemon. Now, to be clear, there is absolutely buying and selling of Pokemon happening on Pokemon Home today. However, it's just unofficial and technically a black market, because what happens is somebody PayPals $50 to somebody else, and then they trade a crappy common Pokemon for the special rare one that they were purchasing. And this requires a level of trust that opens up players to all sorts of scams. They could send the $50 and just never get a trade at all. They could send the $50 and get traded something else. They could send the $50 and get traded a fake version of what they were looking for. And they have no recourse or repercussion. The money is gone, and they didn't get what they wanted. If this were Web3, that would be a marketplace. The transaction would all happen in a trustless manner. You would click, agree to the price, maybe offer a different price, and then when it was agreed upon, the transaction would happen automatically and instantaneously. The seller would get their money minus any fees involved, and the buyer would get exactly what they were looking for without being scammed. Let's take this a step further, because if Pokemon were a Web3 game today, then Nintendo and the Pokemon Company would have the option of radically shifting the business model of the game, and they could do so in a way that benefits both themselves and players. This would look like a shift to gaming as a service. And gaming as a service traditionally means a low or $0 entry cost to get into the game, but that they are going to collect fees through a subscription or various other manners to help fund the game. If you've downloaded a game on your phone, you've seen gaming as a service in some fashion. For Pokemon, this could easily be done in seasons, where you're paying to get access for a certain amount of time to competitive battling, for example, or special events. They could wall off content to paid players only for the first 6 months, for example, and then roll it out to free players if they wanted to. They could simply make the game free entirely and only collect fees from the marketplace that would exist. And because Pokemon has so much demand for buying, selling, trading of in-game assets already, they know that this would work and could measure how much revenue they could capture that way right now. And that number would only grow under this model. So it's kind of an everybody wins scenario. Yes, players are likely going to spend more money in that scenario, the serious players that want to spend the money at least, but nobody would be forced to. More players would be able to play the game for less money, and everybody gets what they want. So let's talk through what a Web3 Pokemon game might look like. All Pokemon games start out the same way, essentially. You kick off the story, and it always involves meeting the local Pokemon professor to choose your starter Pokemon. He or she is going to present you with 3 choices: a water type, a grass type, and a fire type, and then you get to pick one of those to be your first Pokemon. You don't have to use it, but they tend to be the most popular Pokemon of the generation, and part of that is because you can't get another starter. Those 3 are often the only 3 versions in the game, and getting the other 2 typically requires starting the game over and playing again. However, in a Web3 version, the game would be free, and you would be given less desirable choices to start the game off with. The way that I envision it is some of the low-level common Pokemon that you're going to find right away in-game, that would be what you get to choose as your starter Pokemon for free. In Generation 1, this would be something like a Pidgey or Rattata. And then you would be presented with an upgrade option or a premium option, and that is where you get to choose one of the more typical starter Pokemon instead, your Charmander, Bulbasaur, Squirtle. But you would pay, say, 10 or 15 bucks to get access to one of those. And in a Web3 world, that sale could happen between 2 players instead of between Nintendo and the player. And that means that the money is staying within the ecosystem, and other players are getting an opportunity to participate in the economic side of the video game, which certainly not everybody's going to be interested in doing, but absolutely some of us want to be able to do. Then you start your adventure, whether you've got a free Rattata or you've got a paid Squirtle. Either way, you are going on your adventure, and that means finding different towns with Pokemon gyms where you can compete to earn a gym badge. And inside of all of those towns, there's always a bunch of different Pokemon vendors. However, in the Web3 world, those aren't going to be static NPCs. Those are going to be other players. They may have purchased something to own the rights to that shop. There may be a different mechanic for doing it. It could just be an open marketplace. But either way, you would be buying from other players that have collected or created those items for you in-game. This could be taken a step further, and creators could build specific things in-game that get resold as well. Wouldn't it be cool if your favorite brand or artist was able to make a special edition backpack that your character could wear inside of the game to show off and look different and very cool? That would be a real possibility in Web3 that doesn't really exist today. Then, when you get to the post-game, nowadays Pokemon games have a feature called raids, and raids are where multiple players team up to take on an extra powerful boss level Pokemon, and they're a lot of fun. They're difficult. They give you another avenue for potentially collecting additional Pokemon, and they're really enjoyable. Because there are so many varieties out there and so many different special versions that they could create and roll out, this could be an endless supply of prizes that people want to go after, and they can continually make these things more and more difficult but also give you ways to deal with the new difficulty level. And each time they introduce a little change like that, it creates additional demand for something that didn't necessarily exist before. And this creates all sorts of opportunities where they could airdrop a new item to all of their players, for example, to help them along with a new mode or a new enemy that they're going after. And when really difficult content is created, people are going to figure out the best ways to tackle that content. And in the world of Pokemon, that is going to require a very well-built specific Pokemon, potentially multiple Pokemon, and potentially require various different items to either create that Pokemon or to set it up for these raid battles. And this means that there's constantly a reason for players to be using what they have in game to improve their teams, and it allows the economy to continue to exist and flourish for a long time. In fact, in the case of Pokemon, they actually could have a single game that just continues to get bigger and bigger and better and last for years and years. It would be entirely possible for them to create a version that exists forever. That is how popular Pokemon is, and something in the Web3 world is going to get that popular as well and is going to last for decades. And that wraps up today's thought exercise on what a Web3 version of Pokemon might look like. I hope that this example helped highlight for you that Web3 technology is really here to just bring additional benefits to the players. It also brings additional benefits to the developers as well, and this is the reason why it is the future for video games. I hope you found this video fun and entertaining. If you did, consider giving me a follow on Twitter. That's where I love to interact with the Web3 gaming community and answer all of your questions. Also, if you've made it this far and haven't already, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future content from the Freeroll.